It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, Jon, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It can be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later.
Hello and welcome back to another brand new episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. My name is John Wilson, and this podcast is a journey through the classic science fiction drama Babylon 5, looking at every episode 30 years after it was produced. And today we're on the penultimate episode of Season 2. And with me along for the journey every day is Mr. Blaine Dowler. Welcome, Blaine.
Oh, yes, welcome, John. I'm here. I've been taken out of my preservation and brought forth. You have to answer my questions very carefully.
Otherwise you'll rip me a new one. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah. So in case people hadn't guessed.
So we are talking today about Comes the Inquisitor, which I appreciate the proper verb tense, because a lot of times whenever people use that structure, they just leave it as come the Inquisitor, because they forget that it's a singular verb, and so it should have an S on the end, but that's okay. And this is the episode that was released on 25th October 1995, which is why we are releasing this episode 25th October 2025, even though we're recording it before Christmas of 2023, because that's just how we roll. And Blaine, yeah, penultimate episode of the season.
Yes, we are definitely building towards what's coming up next week, and we have something that's a follow-up almost immediately of last week.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say we're building, although maybe the stuff that happens here gets fed into next week. I don't know. It almost seems like, I don't know, this feels like a possibly unnecessary character note on the side as we go towards important stuff. But I could be mistaken, because I don't ever know how these things are going to have ramifications in the future. But yes, the episode was written by JMS, as everyone is going to be from now on, except for one exception coming up in a couple of years. We have Michael, I'm going to go with Bejar, is the director. Is he a new director for us?
No, he most recently directed There All the Honor Lies. He had also directed The Geometry of Shadows.
Okay. For some reason, his name did not stick in my brain.
Okay, it could be because I mispronounced it when we discussed it in the past, but yes, he is Straczynski's favorite director. Because he does the best job of just seeing what's on the page and figuring out what was in Straczynski's head and just putting that on screen.
He can see inside the JMS brain, the brain MS. Yeah, so what we have going on in this is basically mostly a Delenn piece. So Delenn's walking around just being Delenn. I'm in bar with hair, kind of strange, but whatever. And she is confronted in the hallways by Ambassador Kosh. Ambassador Kosh says that there might be something wrong with you. I'm not sure. So we're going to bring an Inquisitor. And yeah, good luck with that. So she tells Captain Sheridan, somebody's coming. I don't know who, I don't know when, but when he does, you need to make sure to give him absolutely no impediment and let him do everything he needs to do. And Sheridan's like, I don't know how I can fulfill that request, but okay. Turns out he doesn't have to think too hard, because a Vorlon ship comes out of the jump point, arrives at the station. Ivanova calls down to Sheridan, I got something for you. But it is not a Vorlon who disembarks and comes aboard the station, but rather a seeming human who is dressed in old-fashioned, basically old-timey black and white suit with a little hat and everything, carrying a cane. He finds Delenn, He says he's the Inquisitor, and he begins to question her rather harshly about who she is, what her purpose in life is, and most everything she says, he says is an invalid response. Who are you? My name is Delenn. No, that's your name. That's not who you are. Who are you? I'm the ambassador. No, you're not. Who are you? This and this. She describes her life in all sorts of different ways. They're not good enough. And he even starts to torture her a bit. Now, at some point during all these things, Captain Sheridan confronts the visitor, whose name is Sebastian. And Sebastian, he wants to know who Sebastian is and what he's doing there. And Sebastian says, look, I am here for the Vorlons. If you want to know who I am, I was born, and he gives a year in the 19th century. He says he's from this and this address in London, England. He was picked up by the Vorlons, this would be centuries ago, and he works for them, and they put him in preservation whenever he's not doing a particular job. And whenever Sheridan wants to know more about the Vorlons, he's like, I'm not going to tell you. So just stop asking. The questioning of Delenn gets more intense, and eventually Sheridan gets involved, tries to protect her from what he sees as abuse and accostation and attacks. And so Sebastian brings him into it and hooks him up to this sort of like, I don't know, pain lattice, and starts to inflict him with pains and tortures. Delenn begs him to stop, orders him to stop, commands him to stop. And this comes to a head when Sebastian makes the point. Are you willing to die for this person? Are you willing to not fulfill your objective, not be known? You're in the corner in this dark room. No one will know how or why you died. You'll just be gone. Is that something you'd be willing to do for this, for this one person? And Dylan is basically like, yes, life is most important. If I'm gone, my cause will be picked up by somebody else. Somebody else will fight this fight. You just need to stop. And everything comes to an end. Everything disappears in the room that they're in, and the doors open, and Sebastian's standing right there saying, okay, good job, y'all passed. And basically the whole thing was to find out, to make sure that they were not doing any of these good works, if you will, for fame, for glory, for personal gain, if they were just fighting for the cause of light, if you will. And since that turns out to be the case, job's done. So Sheridan confronts Sebastian as he's about to disembark and says, hey, looked up the name you gave me, looked up the address and the date you gave me and the date you said you disappeared. And that was right after a string of brutal murders were done in London. So that's a weird coincidence. And Sebastian says that the Vorlons had seen what he saw as destruction of immorality. He had seen ugliness in London. He was trying to wipe it out, and he was using very brutal means to do so. And so they picked him up, and they decided to let him be their dirty work person, trying to root out immorality through brutal means. And they've been keeping him in preservation for hundreds of years in between jobs, and he's hoping that this time, since he was actually successful in finding good people, that maybe they'll finally let him die. And as he leaves, he's like, something about, you can call me Jack, or something like that. So, yeah, he was Jack the Ripper, but not the same Jack the Ripper who was Red Jack on the Enterprise. B-plot. Up on last episode, Ambassador Jakar is making speeches and preaching and trying to drum up and tip it, saying basically they came for us, they will come for you next if you don't do something. He's not getting much success though of people listening to him. He tries to go through the black market to start getting weapons to come through the station. Garibaldi doesn't like this, so he confronts Jakar, and Jakar doesn't lie to him. So Garibaldi basically leans into the idea of trusting each other and gives him information on alternative routes he can use for his goals. Jakar talks to various Narns who are willing to, help him and work with him, but only if he can prove himself by getting them messages from the Narn homeworld, because the Centauri have cut off the Narn homeworld. And Jakar doesn't have any way of doing this. So he goes to Captain Sheridan before Sheridan gets tortured and says, hey, this is what I need. And Sheridan's like, okay, I don't know, but I will do my best. So Sheridan goes to Garibaldi and the Rangers and says, hey, this sounds like a job for the Rangers. Can we get the Rangers to be a communications relay from the Narn homeworld to the station here? We can pass those messages on to Jakar, and Jakar can pass those messages on to his people, and we can keep the Narn interests on the station stabilized. Jakar can continue to be that stabilizing force. And sure enough, by the end of the episode, Jakar has a series of recordings that he is playing for the other Narns on at the station. And there is a couple of scenes in this plot line with Vir, that is Molari's aide. He sees Jakar preaching and trying to drum up support, and he just kind of silently watches in the background and looks sad. And as he's walking through the hallways, he is accosted by other Centauri who are like, can you please give a message to Molari, or can we see Molari, or can we have the ear of Molari? He's like, no. He's busy. He's gone, whatever. And he goes into the lift and doesn't realize it until the door is closed and he's moving, but Jakar was already in the lift. And so Vir stands there awkwardly for a moment, and then he turns to Jakar and says, look, I'm sorry. I tried to get them to stop. They wouldn't listen to me. No one ever listens to me. But I'm sorry. If I could do something, I would. And Jakar hears him, looks him in the eye, slices his own palm, and as blood drips from his palm, he says, dead, 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 dead. Long enough that it starts to get creepy. And then he's like, are you able to apologize to all of them? And of course, Vir can't apologize to the dead. And Jakar says, then I can't forgive. And so Vir's well-intentioned and, to my mind, well-placed words just did not fall right because of how much has happened and how Jakar feels about it. So, yeah, I think I've hit everything on the story. Did I miss any major points?
No, you got everything.
So this was, like I said, it feels like a sort of a side note. I mean, the stuff with Jakar, yes, follows directly up on the last episode, but I'm not sure how much that needed to happen right now or how much it's going to be followed up on next episode. Certainly it's a way to use the Rangers because we just heard about them recently. But the main plot, the stuff with Delenn and Sheridan, feels like a character note that is nice to have, but sandwiched between these two episodes, it feels weird. If we had swapped last week and this week for this A-plot, that would feel a lot more natural. But after everything that happened last week, it just feels weird to like sort of walk over here and do this thing for a minute and then go back into what I assume is going to be a pretty intense season finale.
Continuity speaking, I don't think we can swap this week and last week, because it was last week that Sheridan learned about the Rangers and was promoted to co-leader with Delenn in Kosh's presence, although Kosh didn't say anything last week. That's why Kosh decided, no, let's make sure that we're backing the right horses here.
Okay, so this happened because of the Ranger leadership?
Yes, this happened because of that Ranger leadership, because they were involved moving forward. And Kosh wanted to make sure that they were both the right people. He only spoke to Delenn because she would understand it, and Sheridan wouldn't. So they needed to see that Sheridan would step up. So the Vorlons are aware of the criteria that the Inquisitor is using, and it's probably their idea. And Kosh he did orchestrate this as a follow-up from the status change last week.
All right, I missed the connection between this all happening and it being directly related to their new position with the Rangers. That makes sense.
Yeah, those dots were not connected on screen.
Yeah. It could have just as easily happened at the beginning of next season, feels like, but I don't know what next season holds in store, so who knows. Anyways, But that being said, placement issues feeling weird, I did enjoy the episode. I have a really big quibble with Jack the Ripper being used this way for the storytelling, but until that revealed, everything else felt pretty cool. The idea that the Vorlons had pulled a human out of the 19th century for some reason and was using him to interface with other humans and aliens was pretty cool. All the stuff with Jakar was well done. I really liked seeing how Veer is reacting to everything. Lots of good stuff.
Oh yeah, the character moments, everything in the Jakar plotline. Right, as you said, the scene with Veer, the first scene with Sheridan and Garibaldi, where Sheridan's going, well, we know that Jakar is a known quantity. Who knows who to replace him? It's in our best interest to keep him positioned where he is.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, his conversation with Garibaldi, where Garibaldi gave him the chance to be disappointed, and he chose not to be. That was a good conversation. But yeah, a lot of this comes in, and it is building from a production side. It also requires mostly lighting and not a whole lot of CGI or other effects. There's just the bit where Sheridan gets blasted into the wall when he first shows up, and a couple exterior shots, but nothing super extravagant. So it is a way to start prepping the work for the season finale. The effects teams could basically have an additional week to start planning from the script level while this was being filmed, because it didn't need to do much for this particular episode.
Right. And I guess it may have also been thought of as not just a breathing room for the production, but also a breathing room for the viewers. Assuming that the events of last episode and the events of next episode are not that directly connected, because the Narn Centauri conflict has been wrapped up and we're going to be launching into whatever the Great War is, that they're like probably a little bit connected, but not super connected, that you could just like have a week off of all of that before bringing another element in. It's kind of like how, well, I don't know how much Legion of Superheroes you've read, but this really huge, long war arc got wrapped up. There was one issue of them playing baseball, and the next issue, Earth gets exploded. So the two events were not related. So to have just a moment of pause between them to like live with the current status before you throw everything else into the blender can be a good thing.
That's the thing on the first time through. It's hard to say unless you have clear signs that it should have been earlier, like season 1. We had a flashback where Delenn's accomplices in stealing the body of Ducat already had the triluminary device that she wasn't given till the week later, or some of the things we noticed between Garibaldi and Lee's and flashbacks to that relationship. Unless you're something that's explicitly out of sequence, it's hard to really judge the placement the first time through watching a lot of shows.
Even less with the specific plot points and more just like the tone of things,
Yep. But again, yes, it does provide breathing room for the viewer, because there's not a lot of breathing room for the viewer in our next 2.5 seasons. So,
well, certainly not after the season finale, because we're going to go right into season 3 and have 4 more episodes before we take a break again. So, P10's going to P10.
Yeah. But then after that 4th episode, we get like 2 months. But yes.
Okay, so Delenn is probably our most significant player here. I don't know that we learn anything about her, though. Are there any questions that he asks where she says anything revealing, or is she just standing up for herself? Like, I was trying to think of what we, the viewers, gained from these characters through this A-plot.
Yeah, most of it is just showing the lengths that Delenn and Sheridan are willing to go to for each other, and the degree of Linear's involvement, willing to defy Kosh or ask Sheridan to defy Kosh for Delenn's sake.
Right. That's another thing, is Kosh has the Inquisitor test Delenn and Sheridan as a pair. Those two are falling in love. Their willingness to stand up for each other and to lay their own life down for the other is probably disproportionate to how it would be if they were just fighting a cause and this was a person. It's a pretty tropey story beat to be willing to sacrifice yourself to save the life of a person you love. that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a highly ethical, moral person who's willing to lay down your life in obscurity for the cause of right and good. So I feel like we purchased one idea by selling another idea or something like that. I didn't phrase that right, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's, they're looking for the altruism, but there could be another ulterior motive.
Right.
Rather than the ego. But I shouldn't expand on that at this point.
Okay. The future is out there.
Yeah, that's the downside to trying to stay spoiler free when it's not your first time through watching the episodes.
What else? Let's see. I kind of liked Ivanova's 5 seconds of film. I always liked Ivanova's 5 seconds of film. When she sees the Vorlon coming through, she gets gleeful. Captain, have I got something for you? And that's like the only time we see her the whole episode.
Yeah. And that's true for a lot of them. I mean, if you're not directly involved in the Jakar plot, that's it. And everyone, they do have their points in the plot, and that's one of the unfortunate side effects of the actress who played Takashima, Tamlin Tomita. Apparently she stepped away as much as she wasn't invited back after the gathering. Well, we know in the first part of the series, we're supposed to have the issue where Tamlin Tomita was secret even to herself, a double agent for the Psi Corps. And that's not where they went with Ivanova, which also meant a lot of the role that Ivanova was taking in the story wasn't coming in the first 2 seasons. Mm-hmm. So she has brief moments of awesomeness, but had the scenes of her own. Those are usually in the Larry DeTillio episodes. As a devout and practicing Jew himself, he liked the idea of having that in a science fiction series, and Ivanova was Jewish, so he put it there, and that's most of what we've seen for her. She does have big things coming in the future, as does pretty much everyone, including some characters we haven't met yet. Mm-hmm. The Asked and Answered books I mentioned before, where JMS they compile questions and the answers that came from Usenet or other online posts and forums. And Straczynski, there's a section devoted to descriptions of major characters in the series. And there's, I think, 4 we haven't met yet.
Okay.
So, yes, there's still a lot of stuff coming, and we are, as I said, we are very close to just putting foot on the accelerator and not taking it off for a very long time. But as far as this episode itself is concerned, I don't know how much I have for the body of the discussion, our Legan session.
Yeah, just trying to think if there's anything else to pull out of the Jakar situation. We got the Rangers involved. Having them be active on the screen, active in the story is a good thing. Even though they were kind of a spoken of element, we didn't actually see them in play. The moments with Veer made the whole Jakar thing a lot more emotionally substantial. And yeah, I guess that's about it. I can't really think of anything else to say about with the Legan session either. Oh, yeah, Jack the Ripper. I think I am not okay with describing Jack the Ripper as legitimately trying to clean up immorality using gross means, and therefore let's use him to clean up immorality with gross means in the future. Because he wasn't trying to clean up immorality. He was a sick and twisted person who tortured and murdered women. That's his rationalization. But to use that rationalization and make it a valid justification feels really gross and weird.
It wasn't so much trying to be a valid justification, so much because he does say when the Vorlons took him in, they showed him the error of his ways. And JMS has done a lot of personal exploration into Jack the Ripper, especially from his days as a journalist. So I'm going to read a quote from the Asked and Answered, because that's on Usenet. He goes about it in actually more detail in the script books. But the question was, who do you think was Jack the Ripper? And his response was, who was the one person whose wife actually wrote a letter to the London Times suggesting that the Ripper maybe was trying to tell them something and that maybe he'd stop if they listened. And he does quote more of that letter in other details, and it's that letter that says, no, he's trying to clean up unsavory elements. So that was in print in the London Times. Who was the last person to see at least 2 of the victims alive on missions of mercy to the jail? who was reported to have become unhinged by the filth in the area around the murders when he found a rat in his breakfast, who had medical experience, who left England suddenly after being questioned with the murders stopping soon afterwards, whose transcripts of interviews with church officials and British police are still kept under lock and key, who is the sort of person who might say, as the only witness to hear the Ripper reported hearing him remark to one of the victims, "You would do anything but pray," who had the same last name and was a likely relative of the man living with the very last victim, the only one killed in her room, suggesting she knew the killer. The Reverend Samuel Barnett. That's my choice. And when we go through things in other detail, that letter saying that no, Jack the Ripper is trying to clean up London, that letter was signed by Mrs. Reverend Samuel Barnett. And furthermore, after there was rumors that he went to America, there were 2 other very similar murders on the East Coast in the U.S. A couple of years after that. And one of them there was one attack that ended with a man getting killed. And that man was a stranger who had recently come to town. No last name, was known only as Reverend Sam. So that's why, JMS had this attitude in the characterization, because he found that evidence that seems to indicate Reverend Samuel Barnett was Jack the Ripper, and as sick and twisted as it was in his mind, that was why he was doing these things, was to try and clean up the corruption in London. You're still free to disagree. I had the same attitude. It looks like that sick and twisted mindset might have come from there.
It wouldn't be the first nor last time that somebody did something sick and twisted and using religious morality to justify it. So I don't know. I don't know that any of that makes it any better. It maybe makes it worse. Still feels very, very strange. It'd be like somebody reading Mein Kampf and saying, okay, so now I see where Hitler was coming from. So let's use him in a positive light. I don't know. Feels weird.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, there is that one element dialogue that didn't stand out to me as much the first time through before I'd read these scripts and books, where he says that the Vorlon showed me the error of my ways and the grievous error of my ways or something. He says, so at this point, Sebastian, we'll call him because that's what he calls himself, he understands he was wrong to do what he did as Jack the Ripper. So,
how in the first Superboy Bizarro story, they say over and over again that Bizarro's not really alive because he's made of artificial matter. So whenever Superboy straight up kills him at the end, it's not really killing him because they said on screen that he wasn't alive. But every other thing that Bizarro shows was evidence of life. And so the statement he's not alive feels more like a rationalization for the end of the story than an actual statement of fact. I don't know. Kind of feels like that.
To be fair to Superboy, Bizarro did not have Captain Picard to defend him.
True.
He couldn't go into that tribunal and face off against Riker, who found the off switch.
I don't want to belabor the point much further. You're right. We can disagree on it, and that's okay. But yeah, it definitely the point needed to be brought up at least, because it's an odd storytelling choice at the very least.
Yeah, I get that. Even if instead of having one line, he had 3 or 4 lines talking about how bad his mistake was, and that he needed the ones not just to heal him or something, so that he understood he was insane.
But all that being said, we do have the Fall of Night coming next week, and I'm excited to see that. But before we can talk about that, we should talk about our last best hope. This is a standout character or character moment for the episode. And Blaine, what's your takeaway from this episode?
Honestly, I appreciate the performances and what's going in with the A-plot, but the scene I remembered clearly over the past 20 or so years since seeing it the first time was Garibaldi confronting G'Kar, and G'Kar saying, "You don't ask questions you don't already know the answers to. But why don't we pretend I lied? You caught me with your logic, and we're just moving on from there." Just that whole scene. I loved that, especially since Garibaldi is saying, like, "You keep it off my station, but I'm going to help you get the job done because you're doing good work."
Right.
In a slightly different set of words.
yeah, Jakar didn't try to weasel out of it. He's like, yes, we both know what's going on here. So what do you want to do? It was not an Odo and Quark situation where Quark's trying to weasel things out and Odo has to get him to confess. Jakar's like, all right, we're talking about this. What do you want to say about it? And Garibaldi respects it and says, okay, I'll help you, which is not the direction I expected that to go.
Yeah, he literally just means keep it off the station because he's like, because it's my job. Essentially, he's Garibaldi saying, my job matters so much, I am going to do it. So don't let your good work conflict with my job. Instead, do it over here.
Do it over here. So I was pretty impressed by Veer's very short time on screen and getting to see his reaction. As soon as I saw his face, I was like, oh, that's right. We haven't seen how Veer feels about all of this because we know that he is super conflicted about everything that's gone on with Malari and with the Centauri this entire season. So to actually get to see him, present his view and the scene between him and Jakar and his fraught, heartfelt, but completely useless apology. Because it doesn't really matter Hadley Veer feels for anything that's happened. It's happened. And as small a part as Veer might have played and reluctant and dissenting, he was still there. And Jakar gives him no room for his bleeding heart. It doesn't matter. What you are saying doesn't matter. And it doesn't. Doesn't mean it's not valid. Doesn't mean it's not real. Doesn't mean it doesn't come from a place on Veer's part. But it doesn't matter. And that whole scene was written and performed beautifully. And it doesn't tear you up, but it does just really land with these two characters. And I really, really appreciated that. Again, Delenn and Sheridan are out there giving their all and everything, but we're like, okay, but the B plot.
Yeah, and again, I don't think either of us are saying the A plot isn't necessarily that bad. I think it doesn't sound like you'd have any complaints if he hadn't been Jack the Ripper, if he'd just been a dude.
Yeah, other than the placement feeling weird just with everything else, but yeah. Yeah, if we hadn't found out he was Jack the Ripper, then he's just some mysteriously 19th century looking dude. He could be the first Doctor for all I know before he gets old. But yeah, it was a fine story. It was a fine story for Delenn and Sheridan. It made a good point for both of them. But yeah, the stuff with Veer and Jakar and Garibaldi was richer to me.
Yeah, the A plot was not a bad plot, but that B plot was awesome.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up our discussion for this episode. Not super lengthy this time out. Short and sweet.
One other point.
Okay, so I'm looking at our agenda, and I saw Last Best Hope, and I saw Comlink, and I was moving my cursor back and forth between those two. My brain was completely not registering this big old thing in the middle, which is usually something I look forward to the entire time we're talking. And it just, my brain spaced. So, lies, we're not done with our discussion with this episode yet because it is time for giving form to the dream. So, Blaine, tidbits from this episode that we should keep in mind for the future. Not spoilers, all of you new viewers, but hints to put in the elements of the episode.
So, what we have here, I'll just do the easy stuff. The B plot with Jakar. Every single scene with Jakar is going to matter again in the future. But that's not difficult to predict.
So the weapons and the messages and the garnering non-support on the station. Yeah, all of that stuff feels like it's building future stuff for him and the Narns.
Yeah. The other piece that from the A plot with Sebastian, I think this is another step down the road for Delenn and Sheridan's relationship. Now that they've seen the lengths they're willing to go for each other. Kosh now has confirmation that he was seeking, as Lanier phrased it, that these are the right people. And we do know that Sebastian has seen the Vorlons. He knows what they really look like, and he is working with them. And if he was Jack the Ripper, who's quoted as "You will do anything but pray," that's something where there's been a lot of speculation. If you read Carl Sagan's Contact or watch the movie that it inspired, there's a lot of discussion about what would happen to the devoutly religious if we discover intelligent life on other worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that he still seems to be devoutly religious after spending time with the Vorlons is going to come up again.
It's, yeah, the whole what other there were life on other planets. Not too different to telling shepherds in a corner of the world, what if there are other people out there that it's what if the scope of existence is bigger than your religion currently leads you to believe it is? What does your religion do to incorporate those new groups?
Mm-hmm. So we've seen that Straczynski does not shy away from religious discussions, nor does he pretend that we're going to be mono-religious in the future. Given that his future is 200 years from now, and we've got several millennia of history. I like the way he did with Franklin, where Franklin adheres to a religion that came into existence as a direct result of First Contact. Anyway, that's just something to keep in mind as we head into the fall of night.
The fall of night. So season finale next week, episode 22 of the season. Blaine and I actually have 2 weeks before we record our coverage for it, so that's going to be an interesting delay, but I'll be watching it later today. But we'll be here in 7 days to talk about the finale of season 2 of Babylon 5, and then 7 days after that, the premiere of season 3 of Babylon 5, because that's the way things go.
Except they changed the day of the week, so memory serves, it's less than 7 days, is it? Yes.
We've hinted at that, so might as well go ahead and say it.
Yeah, it's only 5 days.
Yeah, it's only 5 days. After the season finale of season 2, even though there wasn't a delay in broadcast, P10 did switch the broadcast date for season 3. So they went from Wednesdays to Mondays, which means that we're going to go from Saturdays. It's the same date, just 30 years later. So after next week, Saturday, start looking for the show on Thursdays.
Yes, starting November 6th.
That's 3 of the 7 weekdays that we have hit. We're going to see if we can get all 7 of them before we're done with our show.
Oh, it is possible, and we can even check that if I go through our scheduled podcast release dates.
But in the meantime, can you tell people how to get in touch with us?
Yes. Probably the easiest way is to send an email to Babylon5 30 years later at gmail.com. Because once we get through the rest of season 2 and the first 4 episodes of season 3, we're going to want to talk feedback again. And I say again, hoping that we've received it, because as John said, we're recording this just before Christmas in 2023, and the trailer drops January 1st, 2024. So just barely less than a month away from people actually being able to hear it.
Yay. So yes, emailing is simplest and easiest, but you can also leave comments on the episodes, on this or any other episode over at John Reads Comics. And there is no HN comment.
Also leave your comments at bureau42.com, where all of my podcasts are found.
And you can leave a review at your podcatcher of choice. We check Apple Podcasts as a matter of course. You are welcome to leave your comments at whatever, or leave a review rather, at any podcatcher you like. If you would like us to read it on the air, however, just let us know that you have done so we can go find it.
And finally, you can also leave comments on our YouTube channel, where our podcasts are automatically posted by our post service.
And be back next week. You know, I bet you that Sheridan and Delenn thought they were going to possibly die all alone in the night. They did, but next week we do have the fall of night. Will we be all alone? Not if you're here listening. So until then, thank you everyone for listening.
And good eating to you.